Hey everybody, welcome back. It's a beautiful October day here at the Red Barn as we keep working on the Ferrari Swap 914. And as I've been doing in most of these recent episodes, I'm all over the place. I'm working on the water plate, I'm working on alternator belts, I'm working on fuel systems. But I'm making good progress, so hope you enjoy. Okay, before we get started with the real work of this episode, I wanted to go back and just say thanks for the input and suggestions on how I might have approached this bushing install a little differently and made my life a bit simpler. But I wanted to call out a couple things that I didn't make mention of in the last episode when I was doing this, and that is the video that I watched by a fellow that's put these in a number of times. He actually called out that he had frozen them, done an overnight freeze of the bushing, and that it really didn't make any difference that he could tell of how much effort it took to put this thing in. So when I saw him say that, I figured, you know, unless he's got a horrible freezer, that me freezing this wasn't really going to make any difference. So that's why I didn't do it. And then the other suggestion that was quite popular was preheating this case. You know, get the map torque or get the the rosebud out and heat this case. And while I'm not an engineer, when I was looking at this, it's like this upper section is really a whole lot less material than everything that's happening down here. And I don't know, I'm just paranoid about certain aspects of this Ferrari stuff. And one of them was the amount of force that I knew went into pulling this thing out. I don't know, again, if I'm overreacting, but I was just overly concerned maybe that did I run a risk of damaging something, cracking something if part of this was less hot than the other part and force was unevenly distributed? Like I said, I may be overreacting completely because I'm outside my area of expertise. But the short version of all this is the bushing is in, everything worked out great, and I got a good arm workout, so I'm calling that successful. But anyway, let's get back to doing some more new work. All right, as you may know, if you watched everything I've ever published, you would know that the factory water pump lives up here with a pulley on it, and that the belt that runs off the crank comes up over this tensioner, around the alternator, up to the water pump. And since I'm going with an electric water pump, I needed to work out a custom belt. And so I used the high-tech model of marking a piece of rope and running the piece of rope around the way things are going to go and marking that piece of rope and putting it on the bench and measuring it, and then going online and looking at the Gates belt link at the appropriate kind of belt and working out the one that was the same length. And I ordered it. I just ran to my friendly neighborhood auto parts store, and I ended up with this one. And the interesting thing about it is I may have measured wrong. So that's not going to work. Okay, so this one's a little bit too long, even though my measurement said this is the belt that should work. So lesson learned. But this is the way it goes. The good news is it's a returnable part. So I'm going to go ahead and rework this and see just how much shorter this thing needs to be. All right, let's try that again. The issue seems to be, you'd think I'd learn. I used rope that it's kind of stretchy. This weird little, not nylon, I don't even know what it was. But anyway, I remeasured, and it turns out it was shorter, as we all now know. Let's put it on so we can read it. And that's never going to work. What the f***? All right, this isn't funny anymore. All right, this one looks like it may work. So now there is an adjuster. I don't know. Now, I'm not an expert on belt geometry. Is that too long? Still too long? I think it didn't move that much, but I mean, it's certainly going to be tight enough to spin the alternator. So I'm calling that one okay, and we'll just have to learn more as we go. Once again, third time's a charm. All right, now a bunch of important stuff happens. Here is the front of this motor, and these are the cam belt pulleys, here and here. These are the tensioning units. Yeah, so now it's to position everything with number one cylinder at top dead center. And there's something that goes on the back side of that bank of cylinders. I have to pull off a cover and check an alignment mark to make sure that the cam is showing top dead center. It's a question of, you physically, actually the Ferrari manual talks about once the motor's positioned and you want to take the belts off to keep everything aligned, you literally vice grip, use a vice grip. It's actually called out in the Ferrari manual, as I understand it. You vice grip these things together so they can't move. Mark the positions of the pulleys relative to the engine. These cam drives down here, these get vice gripped together as well. And then off come the belts. One thing to note is, believe it or not, the way you're supposed to tension these belts is you download an app from Gates Belts, and it goes on your phone. And what you then do is you turn your phone on and you run this app and you pluck the belts. And you then tension them until they vibrate at the appropriate frequency. Now, I would have thought there was like some tension pulling tool or some such thing, but no, that's not the case. You actually tension the belts that way. And it's interesting because, obviously this motor hasn't run in a long, long time, but I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this, but just to show you the difference and how from sitting, I'm going to assume, how out of tune these are. Listen to this. I'm going to pluck the short distance here and the short distance here. Listen to this. And now this one. Right? They're out of tune relative to one another, forgetting if they're tight enough. These belts, at the very least, have aged out. They don't look physically, at least upon initial inspection, it's not like they look cracked per se. I haven't really done a close inspection, but this motor's been sitting quite a while. So these will get replaced with the Hill Engineering bearings, and we will have a belt service complete. Okay, back at the secret undisclosed shop, this time to work on the water pump plate. Martin's here today. Say hi, Martin. Everybody say hi to Martin. Howdy. And here's what we're doing. Well, first thing we're going to do is, if he gets his big meat pot out of the way, you'll see that we've got the fly cutter in here, and we're going to make sure that the back of that thing is flat. You saw in the last episode, I screwed it up. Well, I don't know. I didn't do a great job of getting it flat on the disc sander, so now it's going to get fly cut to be dead flat. So here we go. That be flat. Yeah, you beauty. The next part of this is to, since we have to cut an O-ring concentric with that opening, we got to find where the center is. So the mill's in neutral. I'm not going to turn it on, obviously. We're just going to spin it by hand and drop that down inside the hole. This is all very exciting for you people to watch, I know. What Martin just measured was the hole is slightly ovalized, and that could also be because of the welding. So we found an average of center, and so now is going. What's the name of that officially? I call it the groove cutter.
Yeah, it's a boring bar, but this is a boring bar holder. I don't think I know.
It doesn't matter what it's called. It matters that we're going to use it to cut the groove for the O-ring. That cutter is just barely undersized of the width of the groove that we need. So now we're going to measure this groove and duplicate it in the back of the water plate. This adjustment was just made, which allows for the cutter to be moved in or out. So we've measured the Ferrari opening and we've measured this opening, and we have to take it out about 25 thousandths. So we're going to start with 10 and remeasure, just because sneaking up on things is better than suddenly arriving at a location and maybe overshooting it. Okay, take a bow. Yay, big double thumbs up. I won't bore you with all the measurement, but there is one O-ring groove that measures out exactly the same as that O-ring groove, other than ours is better. It's not a manufactured part by some small company in Italy. It's from Petaluma, California, worth thousands. So the 1-of-1 water plate for the Ferrari Swap, baby. Okay, electric water pump. This is a Mezier, 55 gallon per minute. But what I decided is, I think I'm going to use an electric compressor unless I forego the AC altogether. And this just tucks in here just really nicely right here. And since the tube, the water supply lines run under the car, and they come in approximately the same level as this fitting, about 3 inches inboard. So they come in, it comes in right about here. It's bendable too. So I want this right about here, and it fits perfectly. So what I did was I whipped up a quick slot and tab bracket and water pump hanger. This element is essentially a copy of the piece that Mezier provides with the pump. But after I cut that, a couple different versions of that to finally figure out what I liked, it ends up being this plate and this little bent tabbed slot. And this is just sheet metal. This is all proof of concept stuff. But that locks in there like this. So let me go ahead and put this all together and I'll show you what the deal is. All right, and here you can see that bracket just bolts on, and they provide a whole bunch of mounting locations so you can actually, rotate this pump around. And these little tabs go into these little slots, and that thing's going to sit right there like that. And I'm going to just weld this up real quick so I can just mock it in place and look at line positioning and all that other stuff. But this is the air conditioning mounting boss set. So this is plenty strong. And by the time I get this made in the material that I need it made in, and by the time this gets welded here, this thing's not going anywhere. And in fact, the Mezier piece that is just like this is only a 90 thousandths piece of steel with these little bends on it, and they just want you to weld it to something, and they say that's good enough. So I think I'm plenty good for mounting strength here. So let me go weld this up real quick, and I'll get this thing positioned. Put this in here, and I think this is going to be one of those that has to go on because of where the bolts are located. It's got to go on first, and then the pump has to go on to it. And these are obviously, like I said, it's just sheet metal, proof of concept. All right, yeah, you can see, not anywhere near thick enough. And I got the angle a teeny bit wrong, but I can correct that in sheet metal. Anyway, so there we go. And if I bring you around here, you can see how it clears. Yeah, like I say, not anywhere near strong enough, but clears the engine mount. The headers come out here and clear this, so, no problem there. There is one water pump setup. So this is this one's currently set up as an AN fitting. This was going to go in the LS car at one point, and I was going to do all AN lines. So these fittings, I have another one of these on order. It's just an O-ring fitting, threads into the same threaded boss in that upper area. So I have the 1.25" hose. I'll have another one of those fittings here, and that hose will come out 90 up past the cam belts and then into our water pump plate. And again, these are not the fasteners. This is all just mock-up to get positioning in. So, water system coming along. Well, this can't be good if I'm revisiting something that I already thought was done. Remember the super cool coil mounts for the super cool cam sensor, cam position sensor, right? Well, I don't know Ferrari engines very well. And what I had done is I had put the crank position sensor in there. And as you can see, they are totally different where the wires exit. So looky what happens now. With the proper sensor in there, and you can see where this is going, that doesn't work. So what that means is a couple things. One, I have to redo those mounts. And I can either rotate this a little bit more radically, to there, so this goes around it, which I may do to keep these things pointing towards the firewall. Else, I do something more symmetrical with this wire, and I have these more oriented the way the factory ones were, and I just take the wires up this way. It's not the end of the world, but in either case, I still have to be able to get to this fastener, and this one has to have the spacer under it. So, yeah, not great. If we look at this one, it can't go that way at all, right? I have to get it really cranked around in order to clear that wire, and I think that's going to be, I don't know if that's going to be sort of dorky looking. So I may just opt to point them backwards and have the wires, coming up and around to the front. So, yet another do-over, and again, a lesson learned. Make sure you're using the right parts. All right, so I did make a decision on the coil mounts, and so I whipped up a new design, cut it out on the plasma table. You've seen that a million times, I won't bore you with that. And here's the driver's side piece that sits on there like that. And then the coil now sits, the plugs are out in preparation for the belt service, so this won't sit exactly right, but it sits approximately like that. And it's virtually identical to the factory Ferrari coil layout. I narrowed up the width of the whole unit so it doesn't look nearly as bulky. Now granted, this is just sheet metal, not 1/4" aluminum, and I'm also going to take it down to 187 because it was a little too tall for that boss. And so it'll look a little bit more elegant, in my opinion. So there's that side, and everything's going to work great. Yes, the wires are going to have to come up and around. And then on this side, same deal, different shape. Again, virtually the same angle as the factory Ferrari coils. Those shapes are going to get sent back to Send Cut Send, and I'll just reorder that. So that's, again, a lesson learned. Pay more attention to what parts you're putting in. And then I was just playing around with the water line here. I put the belt covers back on to get an idea of how much room I really have. So I've got, a fat finger's worth. So I can probably take this in at least a 1/2 inch or so if I need to. It's all about firewall clearance. But that's approximately how that's going to be. So the feed in, not a problem. The feed out to the input is looking good. And then the only thing to work out is how I get from here, the output from the motor, back down to this side, mirror image to where this line comes in. There's a line that runs up to the radiator on this side. And you don't have room to do an overlap. I think that's dorky looking. I probably can't get it down past the front of the belt. I may be able to, but I don't know if I want to. So what I'm thinking is I may come out here, parallel this one, drop it down like this, and then run a line across just underneath the pulley, and then crank it around the corner here. So that still has to be worked out when I get back to putting the motor in to figure out, finalizing the fuel lines, finalizing all this water line stuff, and starting to work on the wiring. So good progress though, good progress. right, there's the motor back in for running fuel lines, checking fitment of the gas line. I can run the clutch line, figure that all out. And interestingly, that was more difficult than usual. And I suspect a couple things. One, I have the engine on the engine contraption, or the jack contraption, slightly differently than before. And if you remember last time, I was mentioning how this rubber bushing's out of place, or was not quite centered in there. Well, it was enough that you saw I had to reposition that with that 2x4, because the angle of the jack contraption was causing, when I tried to push it up and get this part to go in, it was lifting the car off the jack. So I had to lever up the back of it. So I may have to rethink that, or make an adjustable platform that that thing can sit on. But there it is. The motor's back in, and what? And so now I can keep going. Just a couple more updates for this episode that I wanted to take you through. Here, if we go through the service window, you can see that the hose coming from the pump outlet, that's the same dimension. That's just the standard 90, as I suspected it would fit, and it does. From the outlet up and into the water plate. So that is very tidy and cool. So that's one thing done. I also started working up the fuel lines, updated to a slightly different fuel pressure regulator. This one's got a different physical layout that I like better. And what you're seeing here is, I'm still waiting for some fittings, but this is the high pressure supply from the pump that's going to live back here, do a 180 up into the input. The return line is nicely hidden back here behind the pressure gauge. And then this is the high pressure out that's going to run to a T fitting, sort of between the the plenums, and then come back out and feed, each fuel rail on each side. Oh, and to make sure you're clear, that I did not finish the belt service. In fact, I didn't even start it. I wanted to get the engine back in and get some of these measurements so I can finish running all these ancillary systems. I still got to do the clutch line, the rear brake lines, and I wanted to validate, clearances in space and all that good stuff, so I can go ahead and continue on with that fabrication once I pull the motor out again. So anyway, that is going to do it for this episode. And as always, I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you like and share and subscribe and do all that great stuff. And that everybody takes care. And we'll see you again back here real soon. Bye-bye.